Welcome to the Natural Podcast of Selborne, hosted by Gilbert White's House and Gardens. I am Kimberly James, the collections manager here at Gilbert White's house. I love Gilbert White, but wish I knew a little bit more about the natural world he describes. So, every fortnight we take a deep dive into Gilbert White's pioneering 1789 book, The Natural History of Selborne, to learn more about the natural world, both in the 18th century and today. We will talk to some amazing experts and all become a little more Gilbert.
Fossil shells of this district and sorts of stone, such as have fallen within my observation, must not be passed over in silence. And first I must mention, as a great curiosity, a specimen that was ploughed up in the chalky fields near the side of the down, and given to me for the singularity of its appearance, which to an incurious eye seems like a petrified fish of about 4 inches long, the cardo passing for an head and mouth.
Welcome to episode 4 of the podcast. Today we are looking at letter 3 and a subject which is really outside my comfort zone. In this letter, addressed to Thomas Pennant, but really written for the book, White discusses fossils that he's found in Selborne, quite a lot on the hanger whilst he's digging up paths. He discusses in the letter what the different fossils he's found are taxonomically, and he even describes visiting Lever's Museum, which was a big collection of natural history based in Leicester House in London, and I think it opened in 1774. He goes to Lever's Museum particularly to see a particular type of fossil that he thinks that he has a specimen of, and is a little bit disappointed when he actually sees it. Fossils seem to be something that really fascinates White. But what's always interested me, and with my sort of limited knowledge on the subject, is, as far as I'm concerned, White is sort of on the precipice of knowing sort of the world knowing a little bit more about what fossils were. He predates our sort of modern knowledge of prehistoric life. He lived in a pre-Darwin world. He's before Mary Anning. And he died in 1793, which is 3 years before Cuvier started making the first steps in the field of paleontology. So my big question when reading this letter is, what does White think he's looking at? And what were the thoughts around fossils in this part of the 18th century, just sort of, like I said, on the precipice of paleontology? So to talk it all through, we're going to be speaking to Violet Nicholls. Violet Nicholls is a paleontology master's graduate from the University of Portsmouth, who focused her research on fossil plants and spores, and is currently working as a science technician for Bohant Education Trust. She loves nature and has previously volunteered and worked at Portsmouth Museums, where she has helped to deliver the Henley Trust-funded project Flora Explorer, and assisted in running events and activities for Portsmouth Natural History Museum. She has written blogs for the museum's website, the Natural Sciences Collections Association, and the Geological Collections Group. As well as writing, she enjoys working in the field and has helped with environmental research looking at water quality in Hampshire rivers. And last year she volunteered on the biggest paleontological dig in the country, unearthing mammoths and ammonites at Cerney Wick in Gloucestershire.
Bornua ammonis are very common about this village. As we were cutting an inclining path up the hanger, the labourers found them frequently on that steep, just under the soil and in the chalk, and of considerable size.
Welcome so much, Violet, to the Natural Podcast of Selborne. I think my first question is, what attracted you to fossils and to natural history?
And I would say that growing up on an organic farm in West Sussex had a big impact on me and my love for nature. And I grew up loving being outside and love animals. And I got really interested in fossils, I think, particularly when I went to Lyme Regis with my parents. And we met this stranger on the beach who handed us a bag of fossils that he'd found that morning. And it really inspired me to start collecting them. And this realization that you could just walk along a beach and pick up fossils was amazing to me. And I loved museums. And I really enjoyed working as a gardener after school when I left college. And this helped me realize I really loved plants and I started to appreciate them a lot more. And I actually got really interested in plant fossils and I wanted to pursue my interest at the University of Portsmouth by studying paleontology and focusing on fossil plants. Um, and I was really encouraged by my head gardener at the time, Dr. Celia Stone, to follow this interest in science. And yeah, that's how I kind of got into the subject.
That's amazing. I mean, it always fascinates me the different routes people take. And I mean, that seems a very Gilbert White adjacent way to get into natural history through, community and gardening and yeah, very, very, very Gilbert. So I was really interested as you were telling me about your background about your work on plant fossils, which is something I have to say I've never really given much thought to. Do you want to tell us a little bit more? What is a plant fossil?
Really interesting. So plant fossils are the preserved remains of plants, and they can be impressions or permineralized tissues or coalified compressions, or they can be in the form of cemented casts. And they can tell us a lot about past climates and paleoecology and paleo environments as well. And they're just really beautiful. We can find them as fragments from plants that have broken off, or you can find them in situ where they were actually growing, which is really interesting as well. And they're most likely preserved when they're buried really rapidly and they're covered by sediment, such as you would find in a lake. Um, and the anaerobic conditions prevent microbial breakdown of the tissues. So a lot is preserved that way. And they're fascinating.
They are. I mean, I do wonder. I'm sure probably that Gilbert White didn't know that there was such a thing as a plant fossil, but if he did know, I'm sure that would be of interest to him because that is amazing that we have, you know, prehistoric plants that we can look at and we can study. That would have, I think, absolutely blown his mind. So, in terms of, so in the letter that we've been looking at, Gilbert White's talking about that he's found a lot of fossils sort of in the Selborne area, either digging paths or sort of on his day-to-day things. Is there a lot of fossils to be found in Hampshire, especially this far inland? I always sort of associate finding fossils with being on the beach.
Yeah, there's definitely this perception, I think, of finding fossils on the coast at the beach. And there are definitely some great exposures in Hampshire on the coastline, such as Barton-on-Sea, which is really popular for finding fossils. But yes, you can get them this far inland as Selborne. And in fact, not just Gilbert found ammonites in the village area, but others have as well. Particularly when I think when the road was widened in Selborne, the exposure meant that someone could find ammonites there. And even in borehole sections, fossil bivalves have been found in the area, even in a lane that Gilbert White would use to regularly walk along to Alton. There has been fossil bivalves found in borehole sections there, which is really interesting.
Heard it here, folks. If you want to find your fossils, come to Selborne.
So
Seems to. So is it easy, very easy to find fossils today? I mean, obviously, I know that people find them a lot when they're, going to, the Dorset coast and stuff like that. And I know, friends that have gone away for the weekend to try and um find fossils. Are there something that people can pick up on their walks and round and about?
It can take a lot of patience, or it can take a lot of luck, or a bit of both. It can just be getting your eye in. You can walk in the fields and find them in ploughed fields. I think Gilbert found his in a field in one instance. And actually, you can find them around badger sets quite often because the badgers bring up a lot of chalk sometimes or other sediment. Um, and that's a good place to look as well. I found some fossils before just that through that. And yeah, so you can be really lucky and just stumble across them. Or at the beach, you can find loads of shark's teeth sometimes in a really short amount of time, depending on where you are. So yeah, it can be a lot of places.
This is great. I feel like there's going to be a new hobby of mine being slowly unlocked as the podcast is going on. And I'm guessing there are lots of good resources to help somebody like me that doesn't know much about fossils to identify what we're looking at.
Yeah, you can find resources online, in field guides. There's plenty out there to help. And you can always get in touch with people as well.
Great. I mean, it does seem to be a really nice sort of community hobby, doesn't it? And sort of being
Mm.
able to share your finds and yes, no, I'm definitely becoming more and more intrigued as the more I've been looking at them for this episode. So I think the big question for me that has always struck me about this letter is what did Gilbert White think he was looking at when he was looking at fossils? Um, as we know, he was an 18th century naturalist, and he sort of missed the start, really, of people of the field of paleontology and the. I mean, what do you think he was thinking when he was looking at fossils?
He lived in such an interesting time where there were so many new ideas being developed as well about the history of Earth and how we can understand things. And as a vicar, he would have been, I suppose, grounded in his faith, and perhaps seeing everything as God's creation. But as a scientist, he would have been probably wanting to ask questions, and fossils must have given him a lot of thought, I think. Um, and but the idea of them being the remains of ancient life wasn't actually a new one. Greeks and Romans had recognized fossils as this, but nonetheless, many early scholars saw them as evidence of mythological creatures or works of the devil or remains left behind by events described in religious stories. And even ammonites were called snake stones sometimes, and were seen as coiled snakes that had been turned to stone. There's loads of great folklore that he probably would have grown up with, and it would likely have still been really prevalent. But I think also the 1700s was a big time of change. We get the first geological map of England, which comes out in the late 1790s. Carl Linnaeus is developing a new system of naming and classifying organisms. And it was also part of the Enlightenment, which was a movement that embraced reason and logic and free thinking. And even though he was a vicar, he was probably seeking rational explanations behind lots of things that were seen as mysteries of the natural world. And it also was the start of the Industrial Revolution in the English Midlands. And we even get the theory of the Earth, which came out in 1788 by James Hutton. And this laid the foundations for geology. And it even hypothesized that the age of the Earth was much older than previously thought. And we can tell from his letter that he was aware of interest in fossils. He seeks out answers in the community from museums, from people in London, in order to get identifications. But what he wouldn't have known is that these fossils were 90 to 100 million years old, and he wouldn't have even heard of the word dinosaur, which no one did until much later in 1842. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to get in the mind of him.
I totally agree. And you bring up such great points. I mean, Gilbert White lived a long life. He was born in 1720, so not to, and the world that he was born into in 1720, and where he's writing here at the sort of the very end of the 18th century and the end of his life in the 1790s,
Mm.
science had moved on so far, or natural philosophy, as he would have called it. But what these fossils, what we think of these of the fossils, is so different probably to sort of how he saw the world, both as nature being evidence of God, and his interest in nature very much stemmed from him wanting to understand God's creation. And I'm sure that he would have been familiar with some of these superstitions and things that you mentioned of living in a rural community where superstition was rife. He talks about it in the book later on about all the different superstitions, and that, within living memory, witches were being, dunked into ponds and stuff like that. So um, you can see the different strands of his mind as a scientist, as a vicar, as a somebody growing up in a rural area over the 70 plus years of his life, and just being on the precipice of, really truly understanding. But yeah, the idea that the Earth was so much older than anybody thought it would be, and yeah, I think had he known how old um, the item that was in his hand truly was, I think it would have absolutely boggled his mind. So Gilbert White mentions a couple of specific fossils in the letter. Could you tell us a little bit more about what he is actually looking at?
She describes as Cornua ammonis, which I think really reflects the times he's living in because he's still using classical terms to describe these fossils. Cornua ammonis actually means horns of Ammon and refers to the god Ammon and the god's sacred animal, the ram. And if you think about what an ammonite looks like, it does kind of remind one of a ram's horn. It's got this lovely spiral shape to it. Um, and the word ammonite actually derives from this term as well, which is quite interesting. But he's looking at different sizes as well, which might mean that he was finding different species. And the ammonites themselves are internal molds where the sediment has infilled the ammonite, and the actual shell is no longer there. He also finds what first it possibly could be a fish. He finds that it's actually a bivalve, and this bivalve's called loafer, and he refers to its common name as coxcomb. And this is a genus that's still around, and it would have been in the Cretaceous too. And he likens it to a bivalve that's still around today because that's the closest comparison he could really make. And it has a really distinctive zigzag shape to it where the two valves meet, which is called the commissure. I think that's why coxcomb is
Mm.
probably a name for it. And then in Selborne, we find it's the lowest part of the chalk and the upper green sand. And he was finding these fossils in the West Melbury Marley chalk formation, which is actually probably the most fossiliferous part of the chalk group. And it's rich in sponges, in brachiopods, in echinoids, bivalves, and ammonites are quite common in it as well. So it's a great place to find fossils.
Everybody come to, yeah, get your fossils in Selborne. We've got all the perfect soils for it. Well, that's really interesting. So it's good to be able to really be able to work out what it is he's looking for. And the ram's horn is such a great, because that is exactly what it looks like, isn't it? And I suppose to a, you know, if you don't know exactly what you're looking at, that would be the most obvious thing. And like I say, the linking it to the nearest sort of living species that sort of worked is um, makes total sense. I mean, I do wonder whether he ever wondered why um, they were. I mean, I don't actually know if this is one of the ones that he found on the hangar, but if it did, about why it was so high up, away from me. Um, from the any water. But we don't need to go too far into trying to think about that. I mean, I this is a an anecdote that I did once come across to I was doing some outreach to overseas visitors, um, and they, after a long conversation about Gilbert White and being a scientist and him being pre-Darwin, and um, them saying that um, they felt that fossils being found in very high up places was evidence for the great, Noah's great flood, which, that you can see where the thing, and you do wonder whether perhaps in the 18th century and before the 18th century, people finding fossils of fish, particularly places that were very high above sea level, or very, very inland, may have made sense.
Folklore's influence on it and belief systems and things. It's very interesting.
So I obviously Gilbert had a lot to learn still about fossils, and there would be a lot to learn in the next, following few decades and centuries. But today, I almost can guess the answer to this, but is there still a lot to learn about fossils? Do we know everything there is to know about fossils?
Yes, there's still much to learn about fossils in so many ways. We can look at it on a small scale, so we can think about in terms of ammonites. We've not found fossilized evidence of their arms yet, of which they probably would have eight of. Which is pretty cool thinking about that. But we've not actually found the evidence for that yet. And we don't know how often they built new chambers onto their shells. We know that they did do that because that's how they grew. They would move into each new one and then seal off the one behind them. But we don't know how often they did that yet. So that's we're still finding out about how animals lived. And then thinking a bit more broadly, the fossil record actually has a big bias to organisms with hard parts because soft tissue preservation is much less frequent. So we're still, yeah, whilst fossils give a picture, it's an incomplete picture. And we're still making loads of new discoveries. In terms of plants, the origins of flowering plants is still quite contentious and up for debate. The origins of feathers is still in question. And whilst we've named hundreds of species of dinosaurs, that more and more recognised each year because of reinterpreting museum specimens or finding new ones in the field. So there's loads of discoveries still being made. And when you're dealing with billions of years of Earth history, it's just so much to find.
I mean, I can imagine. I mean, we just concentrate on one area of Selborne in one period of one man's life, and there is infinite ways to, look at that, and so much more we can learn. So I can imagine when you're sort of faced with, you know, thousands upon thousands years of, prehistoric history, and all basically all life forms. There's probably quite a bit of work still to do, but it is so interesting. And it's just something that other than sort of recognizing an ammonite or sort of, seeing them in museums, it's just not something that I've ever really thought about. So this has been fantastic for me in my understanding of fossils. Our final question we ask every guest is, how can our listeners be more Gilbert? So this is something that, you know, our visitors can take away with us, and our aim is for us all to be a little bit more Gilbert. So, Violet, how can we be more Gilbert?
I would say share your finds, whether you found a fossil and you think it's quite exciting, share it with your local museum, and you can learn a lot through that, and they might be able to learn a lot as well. Or if you want to share your nature finds. Share your pictures with iRecord or your data with iRecord, or share pictures on iNaturalist, which is an app you can get on your phone. And get involved in citizen science projects. It's just a really great way to be connected with nature and to learn a lot.
That is perfect. I mean, that you really can't be any more Gilbert than that. So Gilbert White is often given the credit of being um, a founder in the idea of citizen science, and the idea of him going around really invigorating the local community in helping him study the natural environment. And you can see it in this letter. I mean, he not only is trying to identify his fossils against other people's descriptions of fossils, I think he mentions Lister in the letter, but also going to museums, to try and see other people's discoveries. And yeah, just I think the idea of him writing about it and saying, the workers, the laborers, found them frequently on that steep, and obviously so they were sharing them with him as well. So it's a really, really good way. And I think that, it's not just fossils. I mean, that goes for everything, doesn't it? From birds to plants to, use the recording apps, talk to communities. And yeah, I think that's really, really great. Well, thank you so much, Violet. This has been great. And yeah, I'm going to go away and try and find some fossils.
In the very thickest strata of our freestone and at a considerable depths, well diggers often find large scallops or pectines having both shells deeply striated and ridged and furrowed alternately. They are highly impregnated with, if not wholly composed of, the stone of the quarry.
So we're snuck out of the office to find our object of the episode, and the most obvious thing that I can think of is here in the study are these segments of ammonite which we have on display. So these are, I was about to say modern specimens, but obviously they're not, they're fossils. They're thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years old. But they are nothing to do with Gilbert White. So we know that Gilbert White had fossil specimens. He talks about them in the letter that we're looking at today, but these unfortunately are not them. In the study, we have tried to have little hints and references to all of Gilbert's different interests. So fossils are very much here and present, and some of these segments, along with some of the other objects that we have picked out for this podcast, are going to be on display downstairs in the discovery room, and we've got a really nice case which is filling up nicely of all our sort of objects of the episode. So if you'd like to come and see any of the objects, including our ammonites, our pieces of yew, our maps of Selborne, our introductions or advertisements to the Natural History of Selborne, come and have a look. We've got a whole little podcast display. So look forward to hopefully seeing you, and we'll be back soon. Thank you so much to Violet. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Sophia Perham for editing and being behind the camera. Please follow, say nice things in the comments and reviews, and share far and wide. This week, on Thursday the 19th of February, we have our first of our Antarctic Talk series with Helen Lanwick from the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust. She will be talking to us all about how to run a museum service that is based in Antarctica. That talk is online, so anyone can join that, and it will be followed in a fortnight's time on the 5th of March by an in-person talk by Anne Strafey, following the publication of her book, The History of Polar Exploration in 50 Objects. Join us again in a fortnight's time when we will be joined by the legend that is Dr. June Chatfield, and we will dive into letter 4 and a bit of geology. So join us then, and thank you so much for listening.